morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the committee member, along with Lucy, who looks after our webinar programme. So this morning, we're delighted to morning here, but not where they are. We're delighted to welcome ICG members Scott Percival, founder of Law Consulting, and Drago Djourev of DD Research and Insight, both based in Singapore. So we've got an international flavour this morning. Law Consulting focuses on learning what brands must know about people, cultures, and categories to help drive decisions, inspire ideas, and be part of the story. They work with selected local partners and associate researchers across Asia to deliver qualitative projects with specialisms in brand communications and UX research. Drago left post-communist Bulgaria to go to university in post-bubble Japan, make a stop in post-reunification Hong Kong, and then start an insights agency in post-Lee Kuan Yew Singapore. He now conducts research across Asia with a network of partners for London-based multinationals, Chinese startups, or New York ad agencies. Most of his work is in travel, tourism, and hospitality. So in this session, they're going to unpack the key dimensions that define the older adult experience in Asia and reveal how brands can authentically engage with this audience with implications for any aging market. As usual, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, so please write your comments in the chat as we go through. And then at the end, when they finish their presentation, by all means, turn on your webcam, raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or join the discussion. Or alternatively, if you prefer for us to read out your questions or comments, that's fine too. So before we begin, here are some of the events we've got organised for you over the next few weeks, culminating, you'll note, in the ICG Summer Party on the 2nd of July. So please sign up for that if you haven't already done so. Don't forget that we offer great value sponsorship opportunities on all our online events. And if you'd like to know more about that, then please just reach out to Lucy. So now I'm going to hand over to Scott and Drago.
Okay, let me just get the slides up as well, Sally. Thanks for the intro. I think you've also stolen some of our introduction as well, so it's good we can skip some of our spiel. I'll just put the slides up. Okay, I'll just put them into. Okay, great. Everything's showing okay.
That looks fine.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, I think we're going to take about 30 minutes maximum today with our presentation, and we want to leave plenty of time for some Q&A or any thoughts, reflections, suggestions are all welcome. Drago's going to kick us off, but we're going to be going back and forward as we go through the presentation today, so you don't get sick of either one of us speaking too much.
Hello, ICG. Good morning. Thank you for joining our presentation today. This piece of research is self-funded. It's been in the making for over a year now. The foundation of what we'll be sharing today comes on the back of a presentation we did at the IEX conference in Bangkok a couple of months ago. So this presentation will further evolve as we take it to the ESOMAR Congress in Valencia in September. But today we wanted to share with you our findings up to now and get your feedback.
Yeah, so the presentation is essentially designed to cover three core things. Firstly, to highlight what we see as the biggest growth opportunity available to marketers in Asia, but even globally today, especially given the trajectory we're seeing amongst developed market demographics. Secondly, how using our new contract framework can allow brands to tap into that said opportunity. And third, we're going to showcase an example of how a global brand is winning with over 50s in the region.
Great. So why are we so excited about this? As Sally introduced us, we're two independent researchers, ICG members for a few years now. We both run studies across the board, the broader Asia region, and we're both based in Singapore. So we like to combine forces as Potluck, which is the podcast, to quote our motto, that stirs unique flavors of people, culture, and brands in Asia. But what started as a podcast, should I say, Scott, a bit of a vanity project, perhaps, has since grown into a research and collaboration engine, as we like to call it, where we tackle topics that we believe brands need to pay more attention to.
Yeah, so I think Sally gave us a pretty good intro already. I think one thing to highlight is that I spent half my career working in London, latterly with Holland Partners, with people like Julia and Richard. I can see her in the chat as very very noble joinees to the session. And yeah, I've been based in Singapore for 13 years now, sort of carrying on working in kind of brand comms, UX space, and yeah, work with Drago occasionally, I think, as much as we can put up with one another.
Hi, I'm Drago, originally from Bulgaria. As Sally introduced me, I spent a lot of time in Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, been in Asia since last century, really. So, yeah, I don't think there's much more to add. I think we can just move on to the main body of the presentation.
Yeah, just a very quick word on the podcast. So we're not really here to kind of promote the podcast per se, but we wanted to put it in context. So this actually began not long before COVID, back in the end of 2019. It was deliberately not meant to be about research, but more of a chance to engage in the wider brand marketing media space across Asia. And we've interviewed everybody from brand strategists, planners to client-side marketers and academics.
And then, as part of this research that we're sharing with you today, we conducted a series of dedicated interviews, 5 episodes, introducing our thinking, speaking to a range of different experts across Asia in the older adult space, from Japanese silver backpackers, people who write about Japanese silver backpackers, to people who identify the human AI hybrid as the next frontier of age-inclusive workspaces. So some really interesting content there if you're interested to check it out.
Okay, so enough about us. We have one more person to introduce today. This is the main character of our story. This is Sato-san from Saitama, just outside of Tokyo. And Sato-san's story is important because it's a story of transformation. And as we know, every transformation is rich with opportunity. So keep a lookout for Sato-san's various appearances across the presentation today.
So we believe you need to know a little bit more about Sato-san. So here it goes. He enjoyed a great career at a large Japanese corporation where he felt needed. He was rewarded for his hard work with income, with status. And importantly, he felt relevant, somehow in it. But as he aged, he was gradually pushed aside. He was encouraged to slow down. He felt less needed. He felt less relevant. And by the time he formally retired, he was already out of it. Yeah, his identity gone, left in a void. And this kind of loss of identity can be quite debilitating, Scott. Yeah.
It can be, but it can also be very liberating in itself. So this sparked Sato-san to form a new contract, but this time much more with himself, one on his own terms, not those set by corporation, society, terms which are based more on principles like freedom, connection, evolution, a chance to redefine himself while still being part of something bigger, to be in it once more. Today, Sato-san has a varied existence. He works as a startup advisor, NPO leader, Osan Rental, that's Rent and Uncle, service provider, offering everything from relationship support, career advice, even the odd bits of IKEA furniture assembly.
Okay, so why does this new contract that we just spoke about matter? Why does it matter? A wealth of data from sources like Asia Development Bank, McKinsey, show that first, as population grows across the region and growth actually slows, we're seeing more and more people over the age of 50. At the same time, we're seeing that their spending power has never been higher. And
crucially, we're also seeing signals of older adults' growing relevance in culture. Despite all of that, we often see that brands tend to ignore this age group, and we took it upon ourselves to show how misguided that can be.
Okay, now, speaking of the changing discourse, what can we trace here? In more recent times, older adults were going back to the 90s and the noughties, seen as irrelevant and largely ignored or perhaps even ridiculed. Entering the 2010s, the era of OK Boomer, we're seeing how older adults now become the target of youth's resentment and even anger. As younger people realized that they were never going to be better off than their parents, the older adult we're seeing here being blamed and even shamed.
What we've seen though over recent years in a so-called post-woke world is that we're seeing this discourse moving to one which is more genuinely inclusive and positive, starting to ascribe value to the older adult beyond age. And the intergenerational divide, of course, is still there to some extent. Closing it, of course, isn't going to be something automatic. But as there are more older adults than ever before, especially in developed markets, as they live longer and healthier lives, we're seeing their cultural and commercial footprint begin to grow larger in line with this. So, with all of that in mind, we took it upon ourselves to look at this from multiple angles. So, mixed methods, diverse markets, different lenses. So, we took a non-linear approach. So as Drago mentioned at the start, this has been a process that has evolved over time. We've been working in this for over 18 months now. It's a living, breathing piece of research that has expanded from qual into quant. It started with methods like academic expert sessions, some of those podcast interviews you saw, ethnographic immersion, and a sprinkling of some AI interviews alongside.
What we then did is to go on to validate our findings with a comprehensive three-market quant study. 1,500 people over 50s in Japan, Singapore, and Indonesia. And a lot of what we'll show you today comes from the quant outputs, but you'll see how the qual foundation that we built, this on top, will help bring it to life. In fact, Sato-san was one of our star respondents from the qual. So we thought, who better to feature here as the lead character of our presentation than him? A true embodiment, we believe, of this new contract ethos that we're going to explain a little bit more about.
So we've been talking about the new contract in somewhat abstract terms so far, but one of the key outputs from our qual phase was actually what we've coined as the new contract framework. So this is a framework built on 6 interconnected dimensions which define the experience of older adults today. And they're designed to represent a way forward for brands to understand and connect with over 50s in more meaningful ways. Dimensions which are important now as well as in the future as we look ahead to what we're calling the next 50.
So in a full presentation, we go into each of these dimensions and we bring them to life in more detail. But for the purpose of today's presentation, we'll just take you through each dimension of the framework quite quickly. So let's start with the 3 Cs revolution, which underpins many of the other dimensions. And it's really about how older adults are building collective value in later life through meaningful connections and shared endeavors. Linked to this is what is the next one that we've called different energy, that celebrates the virtues of a slower, more deliberate, more authentic energy that the older adult brings at this stage in their life.
Then we have 2 more socially related dimensions, so new and old allies and aligning algorithms. So in terms of new and old allies, this is about the evolution of one's personal connections and how social networks are redefined or reimagined, followed by aligning algorithms, so named because it looks at addressing the different algorithmic bubbles, if you like, and divide which exists between generations, but how many older adults are seeking to reform intergenerational connections or pining for what the loss of that has been in their lives.
The final 2 dimensions of the new contract framework are first, brands revalued, which talks about the changing nature of their consumption and how brands relationships still matter, but in a different way. We'll get into that later. But also, there's a dimension we call future forward, which captures how future forward, in fact, many older adults are. We're seeing that, yes, they do revisit the past. They may have regrets or concerns, but they also have this capacity to embrace the future with hope as they're reconstructing narratives of their later lives.
Just 1 second, Drago. I just want to double check that when I shared the screen, I don't know if I put the sound on. Give me a second.
Oh, right.
Okay, yeah, I think it is on. Okay, I'll just come back to the deck again.
Thanks for checking.
Okay, yeah, I think it's all good. Okay, so yeah, carry on. Okay, so we've gone
So
through the
what?
6 dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've covered the 6 dimensions, and of course, Scott checked the sound because next we'll ask Sato-san, who you met earlier, to help bring a selection of these dimensions to life. And so let's start with the most pivotal of them all, as we said, the three C's revolution. And you've probably been asking yourselves, what the hell does the three C's stand for? So collaboration, contribution, and community. So this dimension, as we said, is really about how people at this stage in life redefine their personal value in a new way. But let's hear it from Sado-san himself.
今までいろいろ経験してきたこととか考えてきたことが活かせることがまだあるんだと。ただ、まあ、自分で楽しくやるのもいいんですけどおっさんレンタルでそういう女性のお役に立ったということで人のなんていうかねお役に立つというのはそういう感じがすごくあってまあ感謝してもらうためにやり始めたっていうことではないんですけど、結果的にすごく役に立ってるなという、まあ、自分のやっぱり存在感が実感できるというか。
So, as you heard a brief taster of from Sato-san, this dimension is really about the fundamental shift in values and motivations, which we often found people experience as they move into this 50 to 75 or beyond life stage, and how collaboration, contribution, and community become increasingly important, often as a reaction to maybe what they were actually starved of or not able to give through their working lives. And obviously, many of these older adults, of course, are still working, but perhaps in different terms and different ways than before. So, what we saw was really across markets and life stages, the 50 plus are seeking ways to contribute towards different forms of community, which often provides that renewed sense of purpose in their lives.
So, in line with this renewed sense of purpose, our data shows that almost 2/3, as you can see here, share this sentiment and feel very strongly about contributing to people and causes they care about. And so these changes that we are tracing here come from a transformation on two levels, both a personal level as well as a socio-emotional level too. But let's zoom in on the personal first, shall we?
Okay, so Drago gave a quick introduction to different energy earlier, and just to unpack this a little bit more. So we all know that brands love to celebrate the white hot energy of youth. They love their aspirational muses to be Gen Z, as our session title alluded to, or perhaps anybody south of 35. But they often fail to recognise the virtues of the older adults' slower energy, but one which tends to bring more focus, more wisdom, more authenticity. In fact, our data shows that over 3 in 4 over 50s across Japan, Singapore, and Indonesia feel more comfortable simply being themselves now.
There's also some more data that we're not sharing here, but almost 2/3 believe that standing still is not an option. They want to keep learning, they want to keep growing and acquiring new skills. So this is not the story that we're seeing the end of here. This is that different energy that we mentioned that the older adult brings here, an energy transition of sorts, if you will, that brands need to embrace.
Let's hear once again from Sato-san and how this different energy enables him to be his true self. So here we ask him about whether he's more comfortable being himself today.
そうですね。それはそうなってると思いますね。で、なぜかというと、まあこんな言い方変だけど、今更新たに名誉をもらうとか、金銭を得るとか、そういう欲はもうないですよね。だから割とどういうものと出会っても、まあ普通、自然体というか、そういう反応ができてるんじゃないかなと思いますよね。だから。
Okay, so that was the personal transformation that we just covered. How about the social aspect? Now, the new contract is made possible by how open the older adult is at this stage in their lives to reconnecting with their spouse, with their children, with old friends, but in new ways. also, they're quite open to forging new alliances with new people in new communities.
Yeah, in the words of Sato-san, he's part of a multi-generational meetup group called Generis, which it's interesting. You do see a lot of these grassroots initiatives in perhaps the most heralded mature market of Japan, but we are seeing other evidence of this in markets like Singapore and Indonesia. And you only have to look at, say, China, Hong Kong, and Korea with very aging populations as well, and Japan perhaps showing some leadership and inspiration in that regard. But through initiatives like Generis, he's able to meet all sorts of people, giving them advice on all sorts of things. And crucially, these new allies span generations, something he finds particularly rewarding, going back to that intergenerational aspect we also spoke about before.
So, what our data shows here is that 58% say they have, in the past few years, formed meaningful new friendships. Yeah, so we know that aging can bring loneliness or isolation, but there are some positive stories of connection here too, as we can see. Yeah, and this is not only with people, just with people of their own age group, as Sato-san mentioned earlier. I think we're seeing this in terms of interaction with younger people too. As the data here shows, almost half are looking to have more interaction with younger generations. So there's a clear role here for brands to help support and enforce this kind of and reinforce this type of cross-generational connection.
So we've just raced through 4 of the new contract dimensions that we defined up front that describe Sato-san's experience of personal and social transformation with more purpose and authenticity. But one question this begs, therefore, is how is this reflected in the brands that he chooses?
Okay, so Sato-san told us that his consumption habits are changing too. He's talking about less stuff, more experiences, especially travel and eating out, he said. Alongside, importantly, occasional splurges on his passions, 7 guitars and counting. So we asked him, what is the value of brand to you today?
自分にとってまあブランドである意味品質を示すものですから、そのクオリティを保証してくれてるのがまあブランドだと思うんで、まあ、そういう意味でそのブランドを大事にしますけど、だからといって私はグッチのカバンを持ってますよみたいなことは別に思わない。
So we find that brands still matter, but in different ways. So we went to all of these respondents' homes. We looked at the kind of brand worlds they existed in, the technology they use, the cars they often still drove, the alcohol they drank, the airlines they flew with. And we found that from anything like an airline in terms of A&A to fast food in terms of McDonald's to 7-Eleven and even Gibson in terms of the guitars Drago mentioned, Sato-san hasn't stopped caring about brands, but he cares far less about what you or we think of his choices. He's not alone in that either. So 75% of over 50s claim they no longer feel pressure to buy brands that look good to others. So less of that kind of buying brands for badging or for cachet and status per se, buying brands more based on what they perceive as offering, value, function, quality. Especially these are, of course, very seasoned consumers and they know what they like and they know what is worth paying for in many cases.
But at the same time, contrary to what marketers often believe, we're seeing that more than half here are still trying out new brands, new products. So very much open to novelty. Yeah, it's important to remember that. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When we think about influences and trends, we tend to believe that influence flows in a singular direction. Yeah, so younger consumers come up with trends and then older ones follow. Well, our data shows a bit of a different story too. So in the past 2 years, 77% of over 50s have recommended some product or brand to younger generations.
On average, this is also across 2 or more categories, including what you may call, bigger ticket or bigger expense categories like travel, technology, and investments. So very much a headline here that these aren't passive consumers. We should also think about them as active advisors. So brands that can win with this audience may actually have that cascade effect of winning younger generations as well.
So we saw how the new contract can help brands tap into the lives and aspirations of older adults. But we know that there are many brands that are not even tracking the older adult. So how can our client brands know how their brand is performing with this audience and how it could do better?
Well, we took it upon ourselves to make this a bit more concrete for different brands. So Drago and I do a lot of work in travel and finance. We also wanted to balance this against a kind of mixed bag, so to speak, of technology brands, lifestyle brands. Some of these brands were measured consistently across all three markets. Others were more bespoke to the market. But we tried to have a diverse mix. So, for example, in travel, airlines, hotels, OTAs, in finance, banks, payment networks, and some of the kind of new e-wallet players. So yeah, we looked at these brands, and the result was the Next 50 Brand Action Index, which we've already begun to talk to clients directly about to give them a sense of where their brand sits versus others, against others in their category, specifically through the lens of over 50s.
So what does the Brand Action Index involve? It's an index built on three pillars. First, trust. Do I believe in this brand? Second, we have the pillar of relevance, which is really, does the brand offer products that fit my life right now? And finally, we have the third pillar here of connection, which helps us answer the question of, does the brand's comms speak to me? So in the process of our research, we also tracked awareness, usage, and future consideration to have a more comprehensive, fuller picture of how the brand's doing, not just with this audience, but also across the board. So let us show you what regional success looks like.
So
What
we've
do we
chosen
have,
a
Scott?
brand. Yeah, we've
Yeah.
chosen a brand here which might come as somewhat surprising given maybe who you assume the brand's core audience is. And this is also a brand that we measured in all three markets. And actually, McDonald's was one of the brands which scored consistently well across the over 50s in these three markets. So as a composite score, and this obviously won't make perfect sense to you without seeing all the other brands, but just to give you a flavor of how we're looking at this. So as a composite score of 71.6, so trust is high at 74, relevance 72, connection at 66. It is worth noting that brands are consistently weaker on that dimension when it comes to the over 50. So we're not seeing as much connection being delivered through communications and brand marketing as maybe could be the case with this cohort.
So what we're also seeing is that how success in terms of how the brand scores on the Brand Action Index is also reflected in the funnel. So we're seeing some really impressive figures in terms of 93% awareness, 87% consideration. We're also seeing 75% usage, very strong conversion rates too. But our analysis shows that this is not accidental. We kind of tried to analyze this a bit deeper too.
Yeah, so one of our approaches here with clients is also to look at some of these brands and try and retrofit, okay, what are some of the levers, initiatives, operational marketing comms that are delivering some of the success. So that's been quite an interesting exercise. But in this case, we'll just give you a light touch feel of how we've been doing that. So of course, going back to source first of all, the end consumer is obviously paramount here. We wanted to get Sato-san's take, and actually he told us that yes, McDonald's is an occasional but valued ritual in his life. He appreciates that the food quality has remained somewhat consistent despite perhaps a pressure to maintain lower costs. He also admires their commitment to employing senior workers. Some he even sees as kind of local characters or local fixtures in his store visiting experience. He also appreciates touches which maybe take for granted, but being able to do things like ordering food directly to his table, even in a QSR fast food format, is something that he welcomes.
Okay, so let's see how individual markets are making this possible. Let's have a takeaway from each of the three markets that we studied. So first, Japan. And we're seeing this headline here. It says it all. No longer serving up forced retirement. So the way McDonald's Japan chooses to treat its employees, its older employees, is that they're not seen as charity hires. They're valued crew. In fact, they're often quite heavily involved in promoting the store. Some of them, we have some celebrity older employees too. That's Japan.
Here in Singapore, we see the brand leaning more into community initiatives, designing the experience around multi-generational family. So they've introduced what they call guest experience leaders, family ambassadors, that very much look at the multi-generational family, which is often core to how many Singaporeans live, and the close family glue that connects, and McDonald's have very much leaned into that experience. So community integration. Also, interestingly, in Indonesia, around not this Ramadan, but I think the Ramadan a year or two before, they introduced an initiative called the Golden Stage, where actually, in kind of honor of their older customers or the role the older adult has in the family, they wanted to put older performers center stage, whether that's dancing, sharing other talents they have. It's very much celebrating the role they play in society and culture versus sidelining. And I think this is something which maybe goes against the grain of some of the McDonald's comms you might see in some other markets. So very much about celebration and inclusion. So really what we're trying to show here, a quick flavor, is that three different markets, three different approaches, but very much this principle of putting the older adult into operations, putting them into communications, operating with them, not just marketing around them.
Okay. We went to the big cheese, as it were, too. We also spoke to the head of comms of McDonald's Japan about why the brand is doing so well with its cohort. And in his words, the brand is indeed actively thinking about people in their 50 plus and what they mean to the brand. So the brand, how they see people 50 plus, is not just as consumers, but instead as valuable stakeholders across multiple brand touchpoints. And importantly, as valuable influencers across generations too, as we saw, yeah?
So let's bring it back to the framework coming 360 and beginning to sort of hopefully tie a few loose ends together. So we spoke about the various dimensions from Sato-san's perspective, but let's look at how some of these dimensions connect back to what we showed you McDonald's seem to be getting right. So in terms of the 3Cs revolution, they're very much baking contribution and community into their operations in these markets. Fast food, yes, but served up in welcoming, unhurried, inclusive spaces.
When we rate this against the brand's revalued dimension, we're seeing how high the trust and relevance scores are, and how this is served is through small gestures that recognize the customer, and that also deliver consistent quality, affordability, and really say, we see you. Also, the McDonald's restaurants are places that foster both new and old alliances. We're seeing the restaurants as spaces where people from all walks of life, from all ages, can really comfortably meet and be themselves.
Finally, we talked before about aligning algorithms, so building on what Drago just said, this intergenerational angle. So they're leaning into family focus equity, and they have this intergenerational workforce which can serve as living bridges towards that.
Okay. Now we saw how we can bring to life that through the four dimensions. Now let's sum things up with a few takeaways, calls to action. The first one around growth. So I think we saw what the opportunity involves. We're looking at 1.2 billion people over 50 in Asia Pacific alone. So as a brand, perhaps you don't want to be left behind.
Secondly, the new contract. So we see this very much as a playbook brands can use to start thinking about starting points, territories, levers they can be thinking about pulling regarding how to engage the next 50.
Now, it's important to start looking at what other brands are doing. Yeah. So McDonald's, for example, is not the only one that's already reaping the rewards in this space, but they're hopefully showing us what's possible when you operate with this audience instead of marketing around them.
So to conclude, what we're really seeing here is that the real risk for brands, for our clients, isn't necessarily their customer base as their audience is aging. It's actually aging thinking and ignoring the opportunity that they represent.
Okay, great. So, what next then for our next 50? And beyond the brand index, we have also developed a bespoke segmentation that brands can apply to their own audiences. And we'd like to share some initial thinking around that with you.
Yeah, so as alluded to, I think at the beginning, we're trying to think about how we can make this thought leadership research actionable for brands, not just in terms of the brand index and the contract framework, but also helping them understand which older adults does your brand serve, but also who should it target. Because again, as some of you may know in the call, brand trackers don't always include the most inclusive demographics, and panels themselves, of course, don't always have very strong penetration once you get into the kind of higher age band. So we began to think about, okay, let's look at a segmentation which is a little bit more psychographic and behavioral and isn't purely tied to are you in like 50 to 55 or are you retired or not retired. And we did look at those dimensions, but we wanted something which can apply across categories and across markets. So just giving you a quick flavor of these segments to wrap things up. So the first one being what we're calling the embracers, and they represent around a third of the older adult base across markets. And this is really the group we see as one that brands can excite and can get perhaps the most excited about. So this is an audience which are confident, forward-looking, socially active. They tend to be the older adults that brands are more likely to recognize today or would like to align themselves with. They tend to be more tech-adopting, active travelers, culture seekers who have forged new friendships and report being happier now than any previous life stage. They are comfortable with who they are, driven by purpose, sense of wanting to give back where they can, and actively seeking new experiences, new brands, and new skills, very much not standing still.
Okay. We're coming to the second segment, that of the realists, which is the biggest segment, arguably the biggest commercial growth opportunity for brands too. So they're socially connected, they're quite purposeful, but at the same time, they're quite pragmatic. These are the groups that need to be convinced, yeah? They're open to travel, new financial products, they're seeking new brand relationships, and yet they need to be coaxed. They need to be given good enough a reason to be compelled to act. Security, social proof, planning support are the kinds of levers most likely to move them. This is, as we said, the group most ripe to win with the right kind of approach.
Then we have the unsettled, the least confident and most inward looking, and something of a reality check for brands regarding how the next 50 phase can bring a lot of change around relationships, turbulence around working status, personal identity, and of course, finances. The unsettled tend to be more like homebirds. They're a little bit more tech averse, socially withdrawn. They have heightened worry on a number of levels, whether that's online security, the macro picture of the environment, and their own financial stability. They often tend to be more invisible to brands. They represent a significant group, however, with real unmet needs around reassurance, simplicity, and genuine community. And it's worth saying that because we had a deep dive, if you like, on finance and travel brands, we also have sort of more detailed profiling data on the segments in those two categories in particular, but also in terms of their broader mindsets, their outlook on life, and their kind of attitudes towards some of the beliefs and attitudes regarding the state of the world, so to speak. So yeah, that's a very quick whirlwind tour of the segments.
So we took you through the new contract framework, what's happening in the lives of the 50 plus across Asia. We showed you the Next 50 Brand Action Index, as well as a quick introduction into the Next 50 segmentation that we have in place. Thank you so much for listening. I believe we have a few more minutes, so we are open to any questions about the presentation, about the podcast, or anything else.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Scott and Drago. I haven't seen any comments coming up in the chat, but if there's anybody out there who has any immediate questions, perhaps if you could stop sharing and then please, oh, Julia, you've got your hand raised. If you'd like to turn on your webcam and ask your question.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi,
Julia.
Scott. Nice to see you. Hi, Drago.
Hi.
We thank you for that. It was really, really interesting. I've got a question. We've got a lot of clients in China. And I wondered, obviously, you did this research in those three markets, but how much do you think what you've said today translates to China and attitudes there amongst 50 years old, which I now fall into, which is terrifying because I don't consider myself as old.
Drago, do you want, yeah, yeah, I think we do see there's definitely parallels. I think the China situation is a bit different in terms of how many Chinese that are, say, 55, 60 now arrived into the kind of the Chinese growth boom later, and perhaps are enjoying a level of kind of wealth and lifestyle shift that they didn't have 20 years ago. They're kind of reaping the rewards of China's growth now, and you're seeing lots of stories regarding Chinese grandparents, sort of not wanting to be defined as being a grandparent. They don't want that as their full time role. You're seeing obviously a huge boom in Chinese domestic travel. You've probably seen stories in the BBC regarding like silver trains set up to bring sort of literally move all this disposable income around the country for kind of Chinese. We try to not use the word silvers, but inevitably that's what you pick up in the media narrative. But yeah, I mean we have looked at China a little bit, haven't we, Drago, in some of our qual work, but we didn't speak to any. We didn't do any of this in China just yet, but we definitely seems to chime with anybody you meet from, say, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Korea, for similar reasons as Japan and Singapore in particular. Drago, maybe you could speak to the nuance versus, say,
Yeah,
Japan for China, for
I think
example.
to
Yeah,
Scott's point, I think China
yeah,
is quite an interesting one. To me, it feels, as Scott said, we haven't done the work there, so we're kind of making this up a little bit. But I think China is a bit of a hybrid between a more developed and a developing market. Um, yeah, I think often the narratives that describe the 50 plus experience are driven by the economic situation, as Scott said, the kind of generational experience that they've had. And the Chinese 50 plus, I think, have had quite a mixed experience too. So I think they would have had kind of both the what we call the experience of the fast and the slow lane of Asia. So yeah, we should do the work there next. Yeah.
Brilliant.
yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, I have a comment to make. Oh, Fang Yu, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I find this research really interesting.
Thank
Um,
you.
well, I'm from China, but I've been living in Europe for almost 20 years. But I still got families back home. I just wondering, like a simple question is like, what's the retirement age for those three countries you've studied?
Yeah, Japan and Singapore are quite similar, aren't they, Drago? I think they're both they're shifting upwards, of course, as
Mm,
the need to have an older workforce becomes more apparent. But yeah, it's around 65, but it's been moving
okay.
upwards, hasn't it, Drago? For Indonesia's a bit different. Indonesia's a bit looser, I think, in terms of how much of a mandate it is. Um, because I guess one thing to highlight is that when we started this study, we had retirement more as the lens because we wanted to look at a
Mm,
life stage transition, which is perhaps often ignored by brands, apart from maybe in financial services, for example, and insurance, whereby as we all know, often the richest tensions and opportunity is often let's look at life stage transitions versus like I mean, and even then we're conscious of lumping everybody that's over 50 into one bracket, as we are conscious of lumping generations into one bracket. But we then realised that it was somewhat limiting our conversation with brands and agencies because retirement in itself, it shouldn't be, but of course that's a loaded term in itself. Oh yeah, we don't want to speak to people that are suddenly just on pension income, or it brings
mm,
all sorts of bias with it. So we thought, okay, let's open this up. Let's look at those that are I mean, as Julia just said, like when we take this to ad agencies, it's funny because they're often typically in their 20s or 30s, and they're like, oh yeah, like I don't think of my mum or dad as old, and they're like, oh yeah, well, I don't like. Of course, we should treat them as like active, engaged consumers. But then you're like, well, why don't you target them? We spoke to an agency that worked with Toyota or Lexus, and they were like, oh yeah, we don't really
Lexus,
think of we don't think of that as our target audience. I'm like, are you crazy? It's like, do you see who drives these cars? So it's quite interesting hearing the bias present in client side marketers who don't want to acknowledge the reality and so yeah, I'm going off on a tangent here, but maybe Drago, you could also speak to the retirement point a little bit, but I think we try to move away from that as the lens, but it's yeah, but yeah, the
No, I
fact
was going to ask Fang, why did you ask this question?
It's exactly what Scott just explained. I was thinking like retirement is a big event in your life, and that really has a huge impact on how you see yourself and how you interact with others and how you plan your daily life almost. I think the research is really interesting. It showed us how the society view old age or, 50 plus, let's say, how the perspective changed. And also, I think internally, I think it's like internally, old people in, 50 plus, in 80s and 50 plus today, they see themselves quite differently as well. Of course, this is a mutual impact, like how society sees them and themselves see themselves. And also, like the segmentation, I find it's quite interesting. But I was wondering, because how the segmentation would fall out, like for younger generation, would we see the same kind of percentage of those three segments?
You mean below 50s, or do you mean just younger over 50s? Do you mean, or do
Yeah,
you mean in
yeah,
general?
even say people in their 35.
Yeah, it'd be good to compare against them. I think the way we asked the questions was quite framed around the kind of, the lifestyle and life stage they were at. But yeah, I mean, these are all. I mean, it's the same with the brand index. It would be good, ideally if we had more investment. That's we're looking for a bit more of a client sponsor for some of this work. It's we could look at comparative differences by brand performance, but I think we do. So we do have the segments also profiled by like, are they retirees? Are they still working? And what we also found was there's a lot of people, as we often see in many walks of life now, having a hybrid existence whereby there was a bit more of a patchwork of what work looks like. Some of it could be voluntary, some of it could be gig based, some of it could be more on their terms. So I'm doing a contractual role for a few months. I'm helping my friend with bookkeeping. I'm on the local ex sports club, whatever it is, committee. I'm traveling to spend time with my kids at uni for extended summers. I'm doing whatever, but I think there's also that reality that more of these older adults need to work longer because, of course, the cushion of either the corporate financial pension pots or certainly the government pension pots are obviously no longer really what they, and that was kind of where the new contract started from, like what these people started their career with, what they saw as the carrot at the end of the journey kind of evaporated, so they had to think about a different contract, if you like, and we did see people that often had a bit of a void when they went into retirement and were looking to come out the other side. But I think what we tried to do with this session is try and take more the optimistic view, because I think it's easy to kind of paint a picture of the kind of the negative side, which is of course there, but I think also trying to sort of showcase the vibrancy and the opportunity.
Yeah, it's like you've mentioned hope. I think for that group of people, for us, maybe we see it's probably gray or not that promising situation, but in actual fact, they can have a stage of like they're saying they feel more comfortable or they feel more themselves than any stage in their previous life. So that's really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Scott and Drago, I have a comment and a question, I guess.
Sure.
Last week we had another webinar on representation in research, and they were drawing attention to the importance of not categorizing everybody over 65 as being one homogenous group. You have a group of people who are over 50, so presumably there are quite a lot of different types and different profiles of people, 50 to 65, 65, 75, 75, 85, etc. There are a lot of different life stages, different health situations, etc. So did you actually look at the age profile, the representativity of the people over 50? How representative was it? And your segments, for example, do they tend to be represented in different age categories over 50 or not? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, it was very hard to find a panel that it was covering all the markets and all this. So we wanted people in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s too. So quite a few. I'm not going to. Maybe I should mention which panel we worked with because they were very good and they were quite confident in being able to deliver towards our brief, which they were able to. But most panels we reached out to, they're like, "Are you out of your minds? Like these people don't exist. If they're not in our panel, you know."
Yeah.
So
Or the
that was
cost
quite.
or the cost varied widely as well in terms of trying to hedge their
Yeah, so we did.
variation.
So
Yeah.
they would say we can reach them offline. We could go and pick them out in the streets, which obviously meant a massive investment, which we weren't able to afford. Um, so in that sense, how representative? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but how representative is our sample? We kind of went with as much as was possible to reach in terms of how old we could get. We did speak to people 75 plus as well, a small portion of the sample, but they were there. So we feel quite confident on that
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, we set quotas, didn't we? We set quotas to have enough, a good balance between 50s, 60s, and over 70s.
Yeah.
The over 70s is where the penetration began to drop off, and we had to, extend field work a little bit to get a balance. But but I think to answer your question, I think the reason the segments are quite interesting is also because we deliberately wanted that to be a lens on let's try and look for using cluster analysis or we actually worked with the ICG's Elliot Farron on that as well. We should give him some credit here too. So
That's
there was
right,
yeah,
Elliot. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
there
good
was a
point. Yeah.
yeah, an ICGer helped us with
Yeah.
the quant work, which is not usually our day job. And
Yeah.
we ended up doing, we started off thinking more like a grouping. We didn't want to go down full segmentation, but we ended up realizing that we needed to do something a bit more, properly, statistically robust and analytical. So yeah, in short, I think we've got a good representation. But this is also why we want clients to, I think, look at the segmentation, and we've got the kind of golden questions, the typing tool, if you like. So it's a starting place because obviously we would like to slice and dice it more to your point, Sally, regarding like, okay, so if we overlay this with your category usage, with your, with the other markers a brand might see as important for them, whether they're a customer, non-customer, etc., and the life stage they're at. But we do have them all profiled by the age propensity and the life stage propensity, the working status. We've got all that as well. But yeah, we'd love to start applying it to some more. I mean, this is kind of, as Drago said, the segmentation's a little bit hot off the press. So this is one of the reasons what we proposed to do at SMR in Valencia was to actually do a workshop regarding the segments to help kind of bring it to life for marketers or researchers who are there. We're still waiting to see if they're going to let us do a workshop or a presentation. But I think it's a challenge. I think we managed to. I mean, the good thing is that these markets, especially Singapore and Japan, have an older population. So in theory, they are accessible via research channels. But not many brands are asking for it. So I guess they don't necessarily top up their panels too much in that direction.
It would be very interesting to see
Yeah.
something like this replicated in Europe.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you know of anyone doing this kind of work?
I don't personally. I don't know if
Okay.
anybody in the audience does.
It'll be
Iris,
great to hear.
you've put a question in the chat. Do you want to read that out? Do you want to ask your question yourself and put your webcam on?
Sally, no, I don't need to put my video on. Today is not a good day for video. Sorry.
Please leave your video off, and if you'd like to ask your question, otherwise I can.
Drago and Scott, thank you so much. It was
Hi.
it was a
Thank
very
you.
enlightening presentation.
Thank you.
What I am curious about is, did you pick up any trends on the impact that older generation have in shaping the brands that the younger generation chooses? I'm thinking specifically, and of course, I'm thinking more in the older generation in Latin America, which they sort of have a role in introducing new brands to the younger generation because the younger generation cannot afford
Yeah,
certain luxuries. So
yeah.
I was curious because you do a lot in traveling. Does that happen? Did you feel that at any point?
Absolutely. Yeah, as you said, travel is really the quintessential example here, where to your point, I think it's a mix of things, yeah, where often, I mean, especially now, travel is becoming more and more expensive, yeah. So younger people find themselves, wanting to travel with all the people around them. So all the people are inevitably quite influential in the process. I think especially in Asia, perhaps less so in Europe, but especially in Asia, we do see, in fact, multi-generational travel being a big part of the repertoire. And we're talking sometimes two, three, four generations, quite extended groups too, sometimes, which is quite it is quite an interesting dynamic. It's not necessarily true, but because of the economy, because of how these trends are deepening, we feel that it will in fact grow, and maybe we'll see more of this in Europe too. So maybe
Yeah, and
something worth
if
keeping an eye on. Yeah.
you think about a market like Singapore, where a lot of working adults might still live at home with their parents or multi generational families, even until they get married, partly because of economics, partly because of what's expected of them. That it's not hard to see why there's that kind of ongoing influence, perhaps well beyond when they've left for university or college or whatever it may be, or it's not hard to imagine that kind of cliche of like, well, your parents have always driven a Mercedes or a Toyota, and you carry on a strong affinity to brand, or they've always travelled Singapore Airlines or JAL. And I think in some of these higher ticket categories, as you say, there's a lot of inertia, or there's a lot of influence over, well, I guess I can't afford these brands, but I can see them as aspirational through to who is owning or wearing or especially when it comes to some of those higher tier spaces. We'd love to go into brands in a bit more detail. So we did look at some of the brands, as I mentioned, that they were using and choosing. And I think it was interesting. The reason we got inspired to do this was Boston Consulting Group did a study a few years ago looking at this segment as well, the older adults. I think it was, I can't remember what they defined it as, but they picked up a stat where the top spending segment amongst this cohort had a disproportionate influence on younger consumers. It's worth looking up. If you just Google the BCG Silver Consumer Study along those lines, you'll find some stats on this, and they've got some quite compelling data, which we wanted to kind of look at from our angle, so that hence the question. But it does show this pattern, and obviously in things like investments and finance, it's quite an interesting angle as well. If you're a family that's always banked with a certain bank, or maybe you've got some wealth banking products with a certain bank, then of course that's often got a family pool to it. And I guess even like this picture we alluded to, you're seeing more. I think another phenomenon we saw is that you're seeing more relationships where parents are having friendships, with their older adult children. Maybe it didn't exist in the same way, perhaps even 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And whether that's exercise or travel or F&B, whatever it may be, there's more cross pollination there. I think in that sense. So I'm going on a few examples, but I think definitely very interesting to hear, Iris, that you've noticed this yourself in Latin America. That's encouraging to note.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited. Perhaps we can talk more about potential connection with Latin America, because this is something that you know, when you are doing research in Latin America, you pick up quite strongly. And I always had curiosity to go deeper on that.
Yep.
Fantastic.
I think it would be a good one
That
to
sounds
get.
wonderful. We're creating connections here. It's through the webinar. That's fantastic. I think we've almost run out of time, so I think it just remains to say thank you very much to Drago and to Scott for their time today and for sharing their research with us. It really has been fascinating. And thank you to everybody for joining us today, bright and early this morning. So have a wonderful day, and yeah, see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
Bye.
time.
Goodbye.
Thank you.